Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is The Moon and Sixpence. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of The Moon and Sixpence with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. The Moon and Sixpence is a novel by the English writer Somerset, Maugham, published in 1919. It is one of the earlier Maugham novels. It was inspired by a year, 1904, he spent living in Paris, where he met artists who knew Paul Gauguin. He became interested in his life and work, and 10 years later took a trip to Tahiti to get material about the final years of Gauguin's life. To reiterate what I said about Maugham in previous videos, he was a giant of modern English literature, and I appreciate his writings very much. He produced over the span of more than 60 years a large number of novels, short stories and plays, which made him into one of the most popular writers of his time. Maugham trained as a medic, and those early experiences of his youth, dealing with the sick and dead, together with many travels and a short stint as a spy, made Maugham the writer. I think he is the author whose work has been most adapted into cinema. Maybe not, but there are a lot of films based on his novels. What is The Moon and Sixpence about? It is about search for home, your earthly paradise, physical and abstract, giving up comfort to have a shot at happiness. I have an idea that some men are born out of their due place. Accident has cast them amid certain surroundings, but they have always a nostalgia for a home they know not. They are strangers in their birthplace, and the leafy lanes they have known from childhood, or the populous streets in which they have played, remain but a place of passage. They may spend their whole lives aliens among their kindred, and remain aloof among the only scenes they have ever known. Perhaps it is this sense of strangeness that sends men far and wide in the search for something permanent, to which they may attach themselves. The book also is about the intrinsic need to create, being driven by the selfish instinct that makes us do crazy things, at least that's how they seem to others, and the reasons for doing them can only be understood by the doer. Or not even him, he's just spurred by an unexplained force to do it. A bit of the plot. The book is told from the narrator's, Maugham's, point of view, and it focuses on the fictitious personality of Charles Strickland, with whom he is barely acquainted, but whose actions, seemingly unreasonable, fascinate him, and he becomes curious about the reasons behind the madness. The narrator meets Strickland through his wife. He works as a stockbroker and seems to lead an upper-middle-class life. When Strickland, seemingly on the spur of the moment, decides to move on his own to Paris to become a painter, the wife convinces the narrator to travel there and try to convince him to come back. Once the narrator perceives Strickland doesn't have the slightest intention of ever going back, and doesn't seem to be bothered by never seeing his wife nor children again, he becomes somewhat fascinated by his personality. What kind of man would do what he did? A few years pass, and the narrator travels back to Paris to visit a painter friend, Dirk Stroeve, who got married and coincidentally is well acquainted with Strickland. He considers Strickland a great painter, a genius, even though nobody else can see it. Further, Stroeve helps Strickland recover from a serious illness, and as the show of gratitude, the latter takes his wife. The last part takes place in Tahiti, where Strickland spent the final part of his life painting and sculpting, and the narrator follows his trail there to find out what his final years were like, curious to find out if he found what he was looking for. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about The Moon and Sixpence? I personally consider it one of Maugham's masterpieces, maybe because in some way I can connect with what the novel is trying to explore, and that, I think, is what makes for a good or bad read. on an individual level. The books can serve as somewhat of a mirror, or on the other end, it is an escape from your daily reality, misery, into something you would like to be or do. The novel's protagonist, Charles Strickland, is loosely based on the French painter Paul Gauguin, but Maugham adds his own twist to the Gauguin's personality. He even seems to occasionally contradict it, maybe because he didn't know Gauguin personally, he only heard stories from the people who knew him, so he made Strickland somewhat silent and secretive, maybe to justify his lack of intimate knowledge of the real subject and the assumption he made in the novel. So it is more of an imaginary Gauguin, a product of Maugham's mind, created from the second-hand information he had. To my mind, the most interesting thing in art is the personality of the artist. And if that is singular, I am willing to excuse 1,000 faults. Strickland, seemingly, is a very selfish personality, possessed by his need to paint. Actually, he completely sacrificed himself for others until he couldn't take it anymore, and went to the other extreme, total self-indulgence, in a somewhat desperate effort to find himself to be who he wanted to be. It probably was a necessary act of survival and preservation. Strickland is an example of somebody desperate, driven by a need to do, and not caring about talent, outcome, or the price to be paid. And this makes him more of a force of nature rather than a human being. That's why it is difficult to describe or understand him in human terms. He seems a primitive beast driven by basic instincts, a fanatic, a man obsessed with doing one thing, which probably is a prerequisite for genius. The narrator thinks he has been possessed, maybe by a dead painter's spirit, and his extreme behavior brings unhappiness, misery, even death to the people that get too close to him. Have you never had a moment's regret for all the unhappiness you caused them? I don't think of the past. The only thing that matters is the everlasting present. Are you happy? I asked. Yes. And this pretty much sums up how Strickland feels, total lack of empathy and compassion. He seems to repress any positive or any feelings toward others, perhaps to save it for his paintings. The more he represses his social animal side, the more beautiful his paintings seem to get. Everything was reserved for his art, and he couldn't share any of it, because it would impact the quality of his work. The narrator sees through him the destructive impact he has on the people who get too close and keeps emotional distance. But the people who survive Strickland seem to do well afterward. Perhaps the relationship with him put them through hell and made them strong. For me, the other character, as fascinating as the protagonist, is the wife of Dirk Stroeve, Blanche. She was rescued instead of conquered, and all she feels is gratitude, which in the long run is intolerable. A woman can forgive a man for the harm he does her, but she can never forgive him for the sacrifices he makes on her account. And when somebody who can take her out of it appears, she takes a plunge. She's aware of the danger, but for her it seems necessary. Ironically, it is emotional salvation, but in the end physical destruction. She seems to grow comfortable around Strickland, maybe because he treats her the way she feels she deserves to be treated, in contrast to Stroeve, who is overbearing with his goodness to somebody like her, who considers herself undeserving. Basically, Strickland gave her what she needed. He seems to have a pretty good understanding of women, contrary to Stroeve. Blanche is somewhat similar to Strickland's wife in her impulsive, vengeful, unforgiving, womanly ways. With infinite patience, she prepared to snare and bind me. She wanted to bring me down to her level. She cared nothing for me, she only wanted me to be hers. She was willing to do everything in the world for me, except the one thing I wanted, to leave me alone. Maugham draws a very distinct line between the male and female characters, the perception of the world and resulting actions, influenced by the reality of the time they lived in and general opinions about women in the early 20th century. What poor minds women have got. Love. It's always love. They think a man lives only because he wants others. Do you think I should be such a fool as to do what I have done for a woman? There is some somewhat outdated and even sexist portrayal of the female characters. I should beat you, he said, looking at her. How else should I know you loved me, she answered. And, my dear fellow, I only hope you'll be able to make her see it. But women are very unintelligent. Actually, a lot of it has been a norm for the entire human history, and then came the 21st century. And one can only wonder, where will we go from here? Somewhat opposite of Strickland is Dirk Stroeve, the narrator's painter friend, compassionate but seems to lack a bit in empathy. He's a saver, and a saver needs somebody to save. But when his wife, Blanche, realizes his efforts are not exclusively for her, it's over. He takes in Strickland, thinking it's a good deed, but it was somewhat of an act of self-destruction. Destruction of his happiness, or maybe liberation from somebody who didn't care for him. But he was too weak to do it himself, so there appeared Strickland, and did it for him, unintentionally, maybe to return the favor of being taken care of when sick. The Moon and Sixpence indirectly is about love. As lovers, the difference between men and women is that women can love all day long, but men only at times. Men's love is much more physical, that's why it is not as deep or extreme. The difference probably has something to do with woman's instinct to nurture a child, to be always present and ready, because it is paramount to the survival of the species. The author focuses on woman's love probably because, being a man, it is a fascinating mystery to him, how, contrary to the man, it is all or nothing, and once it is gone, it's gone forever. When a woman loves you, she is not satisfied until she possesses your soul. Because she is weak, she has a rage for domination, and nothing less will satisfy her. Of course, it is a generalization, since love is a very individual and personal emotion. Speaking further about love, the novel also touches on the curse and fury of unreturned love, as in the case of the Dirk Stroeve's love for his wife. There is no cruelty greater than a woman's to a man who loves her and whom she does not love. She has no kindness then, no tolerance even, she has only an insane irritation. There is the difference between the initial hate Blanche feels for Strickland and the indifference she seems to feel for Stroeve. Hate can transform into love, but indifference can only stay indifference. And all the struggle with love, the misunderstandings and the selfishness of it, leads to the feelings of loneliness present in each one of us. Love often fails, maybe because we are in the grasp of feeling lonely, and our instinct is to fight against it, to end it, which in itself is an egoistical effort, looking after number one, and to add to the confusion, each one goes about it in a different way. Each one of us is alone in the world. He is shut in a tower of brass and can communicate with his fellows only by signs, and the signs have no common value, so that their sense is vague and uncertain. We seek pitifully to convey to others the treasures of our heart, but they have not the power to accept them, and so we go lonely, side by side, but not together, unable to know our fellows and unknown by them. This need or force of being alone makes us a mystery to others, even though they are dealing with similar emotions. The reason might be that all that inner struggle is unrecognized by most of us. As I mentioned before, the book was Maugham trying to tackle the life of Paul Gauguin. Unfortunately, his knowledge and references were limited. He didn't know the real painter, just the myth that Gauguin himself cultivated, so he made biography into a novel. Credit goes to Maugham's social intelligence, perceiving that most of the information he had was unreliable. He visited Tahiti about a decade after Gauguin's death To get some information about his time there, he spoke with some people who knew him, but their memories seemed pretty vague. Even the Gauguin's Tahitians' wives, which in reality were a few. For them, Gauguin was gone, and there was no need to reflect or remember his life. At the time of Maugham's arrival on the islands, Gauguin's work was already famous and appreciated, and one individual had a painting he received as a payment for a 200 franc loan, and a few years later he sent it to England, where it sold for the equivalent of 30,000 francs. Before dying, Strickland, aka Gauguin, was selling many paintings and sculptures for less than 10 francs and just barely surviving. But he seemed to be content living in Tahiti, seduced by the South Pacific, the colors, swaying palm trees, and maybe the scanty-dressed women. Seems he found his Garden of Eden to live and do his work. The doctor who visited him occasionally asked, "And do you never regret Europe? Do you not yearn sometimes for the light of the streets in Paris or London, the companionship of your friends and equals, Cassage, for theatres and newspapers, and the rumble of omnibuses on the cobbled pavements? I should stay here until I die. But are you never bored or lonely?" I asked. He chuckled. "Mon pauvre ami," he said, "it is evident that you do not know what it is to be an artist." Strickland, just like Gauguin, was already pretty sick and nearing his end. A few years later, the doctor visits the hut with the unbearable smell, but the one entire wall is covered by a beautiful and at the same time obscene painting, a work of genius. The doctor describes the beauty of the paintings in a place so far away from anybody who could see it and appreciate it, and in the end it was destroyed when the wife burned the hut. To sum it up, The Moon and Sixpence is a great read. It is a powerful exploration of what it means to be an artist and the possible consequences of sacrificing everything for one's passion. It makes you think about how art impacts our lives and the price one pays for creativity. The book goes well beyond the fictionalized biography of Paul Gauguin. It is a fascinating story mixed with the English directness and sarcastic humor. "God damn my wife, she's an excellent woman, I wish she was in hell." And a beautiful and even poetic prose when trying to define and understand art. Beauty is something wonderful and strange that the artist fashions out of the chaos of the world in the torment of his soul, and when he has made it, it is not given to all to know it. To recognize it, you must repeat the adventure of the artist. It is a melody that he sings to you, and to hear it again in your own heart, you want knowledge and sensitiveness and imagination. There also are some archaic words and phrases for which you might need a dictionary, such as connubial bliss, which I discover means being happily married, but it is understandable considering the era the book was written in, and I do enjoy them. I think people used to speak so much more eloquently and politely, and nowadays all we have is exaggerations and abbreviations. As I mentioned, the novel is very loosely based on the life of Paul Gauguin. He was a bit more practical, realistic, less fanatical, and in general more human than Strickland. There is a 1959 film adaptation with Laurence Olivier as Strickland. The script follows the book pretty well, and I enjoy seeing it a few times. I think you can find it on YouTube. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into a hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I design the cover, and for this I use Gauguin's self-portrait, and on the back, as a background, I use one of Gauguin's Tahiti paintings, and as usual I included a blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you're cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. Now, one more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.